A refinement of the classic sitcom formula, The Nanny charmed audiences around the world. When Fran Fine walked into the Sheffield home, she also walked into TV sitcom history as one of the flashiest stars of the 1990s. Now let's learn about how Fran Drescher became the nanny. Fran Drescher and her husband at the time, Peter Mark Jacobson, had moved out to Hollywood to chase their dreams of being in show business in the late 1970s. After a decade of appearing in smaller roles in movies and television, perhaps most memorably as Bobby Fleckman in Spinal Tap, Fran Drescher was still looking for a breakout hit. The duo decided that they needed to make something happen for themselves and started working on creating pitches for their own project. It was Fran's chance encounter on a flight headed to Paris with CBS president Jeff Sagansky that got them in the door to pitch an idea.
And so I started talking to him, and he was essentially a captive audience because where was he going to go, Coach? I was telling him that we really have to come up with a show that fits me hand in glove because I'm too unique.
She said, let me come in with some ideas of my own for a show. Me and my husband have these ideas, and he created some other shows and stuff.
By the end of this 9.5-hour flight, he said, when we both get back to Los Angeles, you call me and we'll set up a meeting for you to pitch your ideas.
Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter a few years later, Jeff Sagansky explained, she said everyone kept trying to use her as a side dish, but that she was the main course. She told me she and her husband were students of the form, that not only could she star in a vehicle, but they'd write and produce it as well. I thought it was unbelievably brazen of her at the time, but damned if it wasn't true. They had their shot, and all Drescher and Jacobson needed next was an idea. While vacationing in London as part of her trip to Europe, Drescher stayed with the model and actress Leslie Lawson, better known as Twiggy. Twiggy was indisposed for some of Drescher's stay, so Fran headed out to London to see the sights with Twiggy's 12-year-old daughter.
She says to me, Fran, my shoes are hurting me, they're new.
She said, well, just step on the back of them and push the ends down. And she said, well, that'll break them. And she said, no, that'll break them in.
Something seemed funny in this.
And from there, Drescher and Jacobson started working on a pitch that would eventually be The Nanny. With Fran clearly the star of the series, it would be built around her, taking details from her real life to fill out her character, including her family, her Jewish background, and the most outrageous parts of her personality.
Rather than trying and water down the things about me that make me unique so that I can fit into some kind of a mold, we decided to bring it right out in the open, make fun of it, and talk about it.
Writing in her first book, Enter Whining, Drescher said, "To this day, we refer to the nanny as our baby, and I'm the cash cow that feeds it." Rob Sternin and Prue Fraser were brought in to executive produce the show. They had worked with Drescher on Who's the Boss, including an attempt to pitch a spin-off series that featured Drescher and Donna Dixon called Charmed Lives. At the time, they had actually approached CBS to pitch a show starring Drescher, unaware she already had something cooking with The Nanny. Sternin, speaking to The Hollywood Reporter, said, "Jeff Sagansky said he needed experienced showrunners and asked if we'd be interested. It was all so serendipitous. Had we not mentioned Fran's name, Jeff probably would not have brought it up." The duo was a perfect fit to join Drescher's project and would serve as executive producers for the show's first 4 seasons. Fraser said, "The assignment when writing for Fran is to take this hysterical character, keep her funny and lovable and in the center of things. It was never a question of who Fran should be. Fran, as an actress, knows exactly who she is and how she's funny." Fran Drescher would play Fran Fine, the flashy girl from Flushing who goes from working at a bridal shop to becoming the nanny for the Sheffield children. Fran was deliberately collapsing the typical order of a domestic employee's dynamic by instantly acting like she was part of the family.
The network didn't want originally the nanny to come down for breakfast in her bathrobe. They thought that it was inappropriate, and it was like, yeah, that's the point.
The character also included Drescher's iconic voice, which Los Angeles Magazine once described as a Bloomy's perfume spritzer in heat. Speaking to Glamour, Drescher said of her voice, "I had to show them that it was a joke, and not twist it into something negative, like, oh, I find her voice so abrasive. We're making fun of the voice. You can laugh at it too. It's funny. Showing your soft underbelly is a great way for you to be endearing to people." Although heavily inspired by Drescher's real life, she was quick to point out that while all of Fran Fine is in Fran Drescher, not all of Fran Drescher is in Fran Fine. So it's always important to, in spite of their similarities, realize that they are 2 distinct women. Miss Fine is a very brash woman, unafraid of speaking her mind, even when she's not thinking her kindest thoughts. And though she has her eyes set on a better life for herself, she wants to attain it without selling out her principles. She believes in not balking at authority, the power of true love, and never missing the chance to offer fashion advice.
I remember when I was 14, my mother came to pick me up after school in a halter top and pedal pushers. Oh, I'm still looking for the right support group.
Charles Shaughnessy was cast as Maxwell Sheffield, a Broadway producer and Fran's employer. Before this role, Shaughnessy had spent over 8 years on the daytime drama Days of Our Lives, but it was an appearance he had made on another CBS sitcom, Murphy Brown, that caught the eye of Jeff Sagansky.
He remembered me from the Murphy Brown and basically said, that's the guy.
To find the character, Shaughnessy had to channel his father a bit, though what really won him over with Drescher was when, during the audition, he had said American women were too obsessed with being thin and, in his words, if you ask me, could all stand to gain a few pounds. Maxwell Sheffield, or Mr. Sheffield as he's more commonly called, is the picture of a prim and proper English gentleman, the perfect straight man for the over-the-top Fran, and a great partner for their on-screen romantic chemistry.
May I see your resume, please?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Crayon?
Lipstick.
Of course. And what a lovely shade.
Nicole Tom was cast as Margaret Sheffield, or Maggie, the eldest of the Sheffield kids. Prior to The Nanny, Tom had appeared in the very successful Beethoven movies. The original idea for the pilot only included 2 younger Sheffield children, but Jeff Sagansky suggested a third child, older than the other 2, and making her a shy teenager to contrast with Fran. The search for an actress was lengthy, though Tom was eventually chosen because Drescher believed she had a Grace Kelly quality, a great fit for the timid heiress taking her first steps into adulthood.
It's got your personality, too.
And your equipment.
Benjamin Salisbury played Brighton Sheffield, the middle child in the family. He had recently appeared in the movie Captain Ron. Brighton and his younger sister Grace took their names from what Fran Drescher and Peter Mark Jacobson had discussed as hypothetical names for their own children. Another difficult search, Salisbury was originally in Los Angeles to audition for another role, but was brought in to audition for Brighton on a whim, and because they were having trouble finding the right boy for the role. He ended up being a perfect fit for Brighton, though. Brighton is a mischievous young boy who enjoys tormenting both of his sisters while living up to his privileged upbringing.
The boys haven't noticed me yet.
Oh, they've noticed, Maggie Ann.
That's why you don't date.
The last of the Sheffield children, Grace Sheffield, or Gracie, was portrayed by Madeline Zima. Zima had recently appeared in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle and brought a surprising amount of sophistication to the young character.
My mother told me to play Tallulah Bankhead and like Betty Davis, and I was, using some of their influences when I was really, really young.
During the audition, Zima reacted poorly to a joke about Rebecca De Mornay, who she called her close personal friend. She said, I co-starred with her in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I'm sorry, but I can't say this joke. It goes against everything I believe in. At the time, she was 7 years old. Grace was the serious youngest child, balancing her time in therapy alongside her coloring schedule.
Gracie, how are you doing, honey?
I'm feeling empty and alone.
You want a Tic Tac?
Okay.
Daniel Davis was cast as Niles, the Sheffield family butler. Although he had appeared in many projects before, including nearly 200 episodes on the series Texas, the role he's probably most remembered for before appearing on The Nanny is his guest role as the character Professor James Moriarty on Star Trek The Next Generation. Originally, Niles was meant to be older, though Davis's audition was so strong that he was cast in the role. Originally from Arkansas, Davis's English accent was so convincing, many people assumed he was British.
Yeah, she comes from Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, and they thought I was faking it. So, I didn't know what to say. They say, you should take lessons from the real Englishman, from Danny Davis, who's English. And I'm like, okay.
As the son of the Sheffield family butler, Niles is following in the family business, though he had hoped for a different life for himself. His bitterness at being a butler often takes the shape of a sharp insult always placed with impeccable timing.
He wants his contracts in London by morning.
Well, here, hop on. With the time difference, you'll just make it.
Lauren Lane was the final member of the principal cast, playing C.C. Babcock, Maxwell's business partner. Prior to The Nanny, Lane had appeared on LA Law for several episodes. C.C. could hardly be considered lovable, though Fran Drescher noted in her book that Lane is the complete opposite of her character. C.C. is easily the snootiest character on the show, often turning up her nose at Fran, barely acknowledging the children, verbally jousting with Niles, and lusting after Maxwell. Over the years, her character would develop, including a rather interesting relationship with Niles.
Half the money people in New York coming to our backers party, and I will not have those children running loose. Not that I don't love them as if they were my very own.
Although not in the original principal cast, 3 other very important characters would be in the series throughout its run, and I'm going to highlight them here. Renee Taylor was an early choice to play Fran's mother, Silvia Fine. She was modeled extensively on Fran Drescher's real mother, from her eating habits to her fashion sense. Upon seeing Silvia on television for the first time,
My mother says, you know, I'm so glad that you didn't exaggerate the hair.
We looked at each other and went, okay.
Fran Drescher's real-life friend, Rachel Chagall, would play Fran Fine's best friend, Val Torriello. Although not terribly bright, Val becomes increasingly less swift as the seasons progress, though she does keep Fran abreast of all the comings and goings in her neighborhood of Flushing. Anne Morgan Gilbert played Fran's grandmother, Yetta Rosenberg. Although her mind isn't quite as swift as it might have been in the past, Yetta still has the wherewithal to be a presence in each scene she enters. She was actually in part based on a character Gilbert had developed in the past.
There was this character that I'd always wanted to do, was noodling around in my head. So I got to use her as Yetta.
Throughout the years, the series also included appearances by countless guest stars. With Maxwell's connection to Broadway, it created the perfect excuse to include performers such as Celine Dion, Elton John, and Elizabeth Taylor. Another major part of this series was its look, something that was incredibly important very early on.
We knew that we wanted her to have a specific look, and I said, this is going to be a major part of the show.
Fran's sense of fashion became a major visual element of the series, even if it was a slight stretch to see a nanny wearing outfits that had price tags in the thousands of dollars.
We built the set in a certain tone of color so that she'd be able to wear anything without the set contrasting what she wore. So the whole set was designed around her wardrobe.
The set was put together with pieces from several other shows that had filmed at the studio. This was really just for the pilot though, so they could save some money. When the show made it to series, a lot of this would be redesigned as they now had a much bigger budget. For example, the big round stairs that often let Fran make a big entrance were added to the living room set. These stairs though were actually from the Norman Lear series, The Powers That Be. With the show cast and the sets built, it was time to fill the pilot. Although filmed in April, it wouldn't be set to debut until November of that year. That is, if CBS liked what they saw. And it just so happened that the pilot for The Nanny was a massive hit in testing, getting the highest marks CBS had seen for a sitcom in 3 years. With all that promise, the series was advertised during the World Series as it got ready for its big November premiere.
We've been watching the World Series.
I've been watching the first baseman, 6'2", 180 pounds, and what a tush.
Debuting on November 3rd, 1993, the first episode of The Nanny was also titled The Nanny. In it, we're introduced to Fran Fine, who is fired when her boyfriend reveals he's been cheating on her, and he's giving Fran's job to his new girlfriend.
You can't fire me, Danny Imperiale. I quit. No, you fired me. That way I could collect unemployment.
We then see the iconic animated intro for the series, and it repeats the premise of the series that's established in the first act of this pilot.
She had style, she had flair, she was there. That's how she became the nanny.
Originally, the show had a live-action opening sequence. This was produced for the internal version of the pilot, though, and was never really meant for the public. I did find some footage of it online, but the quality is a bit rough. That's Fran preparing for the day ahead of her, and the musical theme for it is Gwen Verdon singing If My Friends Could See Me Now from the musical Sweet Charity. Once the pilot was picked up to a series, though, a larger budget materialized and the iconic animated intro was created. We also got the memorable opening theme written and performed by Anne Hampton Calloway. According to Calloway, when she was working on the song, she asked Fran Drescher to distill the character of Fran Fine into one line. That line was, "The lady in red when everyone else is wearing tan," which found its way into the song. A fun bit of trivia for the first episode is that in the scene after the credits, where Fran first meets Maxwell Sheffield, we hear what was the first joke ever written for The Nanny.
You seem to have listed the Queen Mother as a reference.
Well, let me see that. Oh, no, that's not the Queen Mother. That's my mother from Queens.
As we heard in the opening theme, Fran traded her door-to-door cosmetics job for a job as the nanny of the Sheffield kids.
I need a nanny this weekend.
Fran immediately establishes her unconventional nature by teaching Maxwell some Yiddish and eating breakfast with the family in her bathrobe.
Oh, boy, do you have gorgeous tchotchkes.
Beg your pardon?
Oh, you know, you bric-a-brac dust collectors. You know, Shixers are notorious for not ordering enough food.
Booze, yes, but food they don't know from.
Shiksa. Is that like a tchotchke?
Yes, but they cost a lot more.
And Fran reveals she has a knack for handling the children.
Be nicer to your sister.
Why? Because we're a family?
Yes, that's right. And someday your father's gonna be old and sick. You're gonna want him to live with her.
Fran gives the timid Maggie some confidence with a makeover, but Mr. Sheffield is quick to dismiss Fran after Maggie ends up kissing a boy, Eddie, played by a young James Marsden.
You can't fire me, Maxwell Sheffield. I quit. No, you fired me. That way I could collect unemployment.
Maxwell later reconsiders as he realizes this unconventional nanny might be just what his family needs.
We could give it another go.
Are you asking me to come back?
So it seems.
So what you're really saying is you feel terrible about this whole damn thing. And if you could, you'd get down on your hands and knees and apologize.
Miss Fine.
Apology accepted. Ma, pack my things. He wants me back.
What's perhaps most striking about this episode is how sharp the humor is. A lot of it really holds up to the present day. Also noticeable is Fran's complete comfort in everything she does. One of her most endearing features is that Fran Fine is aware of who she is and doesn't make any apologies for herself. Though she certainly isn't perfect and will be seeing many of her flaws in the future, there's an obvious appeal to a woman living unapologetically. The Sheffields would be more pronounced in the episodes to come, but they're still established here very clearly in contrast to Fran. Maxwell is the straight man, while the children all play off Fran in their own unique ways. Shy Maggie, unruly Brighton, and eccentric Grace. Niles is the fast friend for Fran, giving her a confidant in the house, and C.C. is the clear antagonist to our new favorite nanny. Early reviews for the show were positive, and those were quickly folded into promos for the series.
Look at this. Ground chuck, $2.87 a pound. Well, you can't eat reviews.
Ratings for the show were not quite so warm, though. While not a flop, it didn't quite live up to the expectations put on it. That said, The Nanny would be given some time to find its footing and become the hit it's remembered as today.
Mona is right. We're nothing alike. Hey, morons! Scoot that poop!
Fran Fine is not the first unconventional nanny to ever appear on screen, but her analog of Maria from The Sound of Music is the most important point of comparison. Much like Maria, Fran collapses the boundaries between nanny and family, becoming much more meaningful than a domestic worker would normally be. Many of the earliest episodes are about navigating this dynamic and understanding this new influence on the Sheffield home. At first, there are real attempts to make Fran fit into this high society world. In the episode My Fair Nanny, we see Maxwell and Niles make Fran over to be more conventional in Mr. Sheffield's circles.
And close.
The transformation doesn't last, and Fran's more natural self proves to be popular with partygoers. In The Nanny-in-Law, Maxwell's childhood nanny, Clara Mueller, played by Cloris Leachman, presents another model of nanny for Fran to emulate.
I'm just trying to be the proper nanny.
If I wanted a proper nanny, I never would have hired you.
Thanks.
By now, Maxwell is on the same page as his kids, and they all appreciate how unconventional Fran is. But this episode offers a further look into the role of the nanny in wealthy families.
All right, were all you blue bloods raised by nannies? What were your parents doing?
I don't
have no
really
idea.
know.
Nannies are presented as substitutes for mother figures. In Maxwell's case, his nanny literally breathed life into him.
The day that you fell in the duck pond, I pull you out. I breathe life back into your little limp body.
Fran is eventually recognized by Clara, though the stamp of approval is more often seen being given from a mother-in-law to a daughter-in-law. Fran may not be a typical nanny, but she's still serving the same role of substitute mother figure that nannies often represent in television. This reflects how conventional a show like The Nanny is. While some sitcoms get remembered for how they change the format, The Nanny is an example of a classic sitcom being executed at a very high level by an unlikely star, much in the same way the unlikely Fran Fine is becoming a nanny in the Sheffield home. It's a very old-fashioned job, being filled by someone you wouldn't expect it to. There's this uneasiness with domestic employees that gets explored in a lot of media. Although some shows readily put these figures into the background, there's a very common trope to make them appear as part of the family. Alice is more than a maid to the Bradys, and Alfred is more than a butler to Batman. And Fran means even more to the Sheffields. Their work isn't just a part of their lives, but ingrained into their identity. Yet the employee-employer relationship acts as a boundary to that connection, unless it can be overcome somehow. When the realities of that class divide rear their head in the episode Stop the Wedding, I Want to Get Off, we see Maxwell support his sister Jocelyn, played by Twiggy, when she wants to marry her chauffeur Lester, played by Twiggy's real-life husband, Lee Lawson.
I'm just sorry you didn't find happiness with Lester 20 years ago.
Who knew you could find true love on the back seat of a car?
And so the show reinforces the idea that love can transcend a class divide. But Season 2's Strange Bedfellows really hones in on the elephant in the room. That is, the unequal relationship that colors the whole experience. Fran's friend Mona, played by Tyne Daly, is retiring, giving Fran a vision of what her life might be like in the future.
You give somebody's kid the best years of your life, and what do you get? A pat on the back and a couple of stinking Vicky Carr CDs. Don't you worry. Me and you are nothing alike. I mean, you chose to be a nanny. I just fell into it when my fiancé dumped me.
Mona's miserable because she'll be saying goodbye to the child she helped raise instead of having one of her own. The years she could have had for making a family of her own were effectively purchased by her employer. Mona's eventual solution is that her boss, whom she had been pining for, proposes to her. Fran, after her own fears of ending up like Mona are revealed to Maxwell, has a different surprise waiting for her.
A condo? That's what you want to give me for my future? I'll tell you, I have never been so. Would it include competent plantation shutters?
Considering what happens between these two later in the series, something already being very heavily foreshadowed in Season 2, this is a keen opportunity to provide some kind of alternative to a domestic worker needing to join their employer's family, without actually having to go down that road in the future. It may also be more realistic. In many cases, wealthy families hire nannies and other domestic workers without folding them into their family. In fact, that's probably what happens more often than not. But the longer we see that relationship depicted on screen, the tougher it is for a television series to keep that relationship entirely professional, because TV sitcoms in particular often require emotional bonds to exist between characters. So Fran could never simply be an employee, or at least if she would, it would be highly unusual for a more traditional sitcom. And The Nanny is very much a traditional sitcom. That doesn't mean Fran is forever waiting for Maxwell to come sweep her off her feet. Throughout the series, we also see that Fran has ample opportunities to find a family life outside of the Sheffield home. She even briefly dated Jon Stewart, who she luckily breaks it off with for obvious reasons in the episode titled Kissing Cousins.
What are you doing
What
here?
are you doing here?
Isn't it adorable? Let me get a picture of you and your cousin Bob.
For Fran, marriage is something very important to her happiness. And while it is something of a stereotype for a woman to be pining for a husband, it's still a valid thing for a person to want in their life. And what this show reflects is how that desire for the life of a wife and mother can be impeded when you have professional obligations to play at least one half of that role for other people. And this isn't existing entirely in Fran's mind, as Maxwell's treatment of Fran is very much unlike the typical relationship you would see between an employer and employee. This is very clear in the episode, Once a Secretary, Always a Secretary, when Maxwell is considering hiring a new nanny. In this interview, the prospective new nanny is played by Margie Martin.
It's really none of my business, but it sounds to me like she was more of a wife than a nanny.
The series doesn't offer much in the way of easy answers regarding Fran's role in the family, particularly early on. She is many things to the Sheffields, but all those things coming at the end of a salary makes the whole dynamic awkward. To leave the Sheffields would mean more than losing a job for Fran. She would be losing regular access to the people she loves, although it's that love that seems to protect her employment, as she doesn't do a whole lot of nannying as the series goes on. If this series truly reckoned with the reality of a nanny needing to marry into a family to avoid the lonely life of a spinster, this would be a radically different series. But what we have here is a show that isn't revolutionary so much as it is a slight deviation from the norm. That is, it's the old model of a sitcom, with the classic depiction of an on-screen nanny, complete with a happy ending, given a very stylish coat of paint with the character of Fran Fine. And this combination of old and new is something we're going to see throughout the series.
I'm a nanny, and a lot of people tell me that my life would make a great sitcom.
Stewardess, how many hours left on this flight?
Although it would eventually become a big hit, the first season of The Nanny wasn't met with huge ratings success. It premiered on Wednesday nights, and while its numbers weren't terrible, they weren't great either. It was CBS president Jeff Sagansky who championed the show in its first year, according to show co-creator Peter Mark Jacobson. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Jacobson described Sagansky saying, "At all those affiliate meetings, he used to say, 'Stick by the nanny.' He knew it was something special." Towards the end of the first season, Fran Drescher held a dinner party to charm some of the CBS executives, and the night took an unexpected turn.
She reached over and there was a candle on the table and her shirt caught on fire.
My manager, Elaine, said, "Fran, you're on fire." And she starts swatting me with her napkin.
And she had to take off her shirt. And then there she was, naked with all the suits.
And of course we got picked up for the second season.
While I don't doubt the sexual power of Fran Drescher, there were probably other reasons the show got picked up for a second season, and the new season brought with it some changes. The show would be moving to Monday nights, where it joined other female-led shows such as Murphy Brown and, later in the season, Sybil. The second season also marked Fran Drescher becoming an executive producer on the show. In an interview with Glamour, she reflected on that time saying, "I don't think they really knew that. Even though I was a woman, my producing contributions weren't just going to be something they took as a mercy f***. They were going to be an invaluable part of the show that helped make it a hit. Eventually, I got the executive producer title and got to direct episodes, but in the beginning, I had to prove myself. They weren't readily willing to trust me."
Good luck on your math test. What's 6 times 12?
72.
Yeah, that sounds right.
One of the biggest contrasts from the early seasons to the later ones is how big a part the Sheffield kids play in the series. In the first season, we saw Fran doing quite a bit of actual nannying. In Smoke Gets in Your Lies, she had to figure out what to do when Brighton started smoking.
We are going to have to consult the high priestess of punishment. Hello, Ma?
In My Fair Nanny, we see her help Maggie make some cool friends.
It also helps to unite against the common enemy. A good choice would be your gym teacher.
You make it sound like a war.
It's worse. War is just hell. This is high school.
The first season also included a touching and deeply symbolic episode called I Don't Remember Mama, where Fran fills in for Grace's deceased mother during a mother-daughter pageant.
You are not this child's mother, you're her nanny.
Yeah, so?
Well, this is a mother-daughter pageant.
Well, we're very close.
So what if she's not my mother? What's the difference?
It's against the rules.
I don't have a mother. She died.
Oh, boy, you will stop at nothing. Don't ever go out for cheerleader.
This episode is about more than a little girl being treated obnoxiously by an adult, though.
All those other girls with their mummies just reminded you how much you miss yours.
But that's what's wrong. I don't miss her.
You don't?
No, I don't remember her.
Oh.
How come you never talk about her?
Well, because sometimes it's very difficult for Daddy.
A cute little story about a pageant becomes a story about the pain of memory and the importance of keeping a person alive through those memories, even when it hurts. And we do enjoy a happy ending.
I remember that.
Fran's connection to the children in these episodes is very powerfully felt, as both a stand-in for an absent mother, but as the part of the family distinct from the typical parental authority figure represented by Maxwell. Fran is cool and has street smarts about her that the Sheffield kids find completely novel. It's one of the more positive intersections of class we see in the series, where these kids who grew up in the upper class are made better by welcoming someone from outside their bubble into their home. Not just for fashion tips and creative punishments, though, but to offer love and support, all while making sure they don't forget the most important things in life. In later seasons, we would see far less of these moments. It does make some sense that as the kids got older, they don't really need a nanny anymore, and the novelty of Fran wears off as the kids not only adjust to her unconventional ways, they're even comfortable with Fran's mother and grandmother, who are often appearing within the Sheffield home, and who seem to fill in the space left in episodes by the less prominent Sheffield children.
I keep her on as a nanny, and my children can practically vote.
Ironically, the nanny was less about being a nanny, though it was always built around Fran, and it would remain fixed on her, even if her nanny duties became less central to her character. The Sheffield kids are, of course, still part of the show throughout its run, though they would only occasionally get the spotlight, such as when Maggie got a new boyfriend, Michael, played by Andrew Levitas.
Oh, this is what Nachas is all about.
What's Nachas? Nachas means feeling a sense of pride.
Oh my God, he's Jewish.
Maggie would eventually marry Michael towards the end of the series.
Will you marry me?
Yes!
Fran and Maxwell being the focus in what would normally be a scene for Maggie really highlights how the show transformed in later seasons. While the Sheffield kids were consistently present, they would serve as complementary to the ongoing tension between Maxwell and Fran.
Do you sweep?
Yes.
You're hired.
Bless you, Mr. Mallory.
After the move to Monday nights, The Nanny's ratings began to really grow, and towards the end of its second season, it was clear that this show is becoming a big hit for CBS. And with a successful sitcom comes the inevitable attempt at a spin-off. That brought us The Chatterbox, taking place at a beauty salon of the same name, frequented by Fran and her female relatives. The premise was that aspiring actress Mary Ruth, played by Tracy Nelson, gets a job working there as a shampoo girl. She takes an interest in the life of the shop stylist Mr. Anthony, played by Patrick Cassidy, acting as a mother figure for his son Mimo, played by J.D. Daniels. You might notice some obvious similarities to The Nanny here. The episode did not win over audiences or the network and is certainly one of the least popular episodes of The Nanny. While it joins a long list of failed backdoor pilots on successful sitcoms, some interesting trivia about this episode is that appearing as part of the cast were Edward Hibbert and Lauren Tom. Hibbert would continue to play Gil Chesterton on Frasier, and Tom would appear just 3 days later on Friends in the recurring role of Julie. It's quite likely they were both better served regularly appearing on 2 hit shows of the 90s.
I think that it's important that they learn how people of other religions pick up men.
Although Jewish characters in television weren't the most novel idea in 1993, there was something about Fran Fine that made her special. Fran Drescher explained one of those things in the podcast, The Originals.
I am the first starring role playing an openly Jewish character in the lead role in prime time since Molly Goldberg in 1948.
I was going to say the Goldbergs.
At first, the network pushed back on Fran Fine being Jewish after pressure from sponsors.
I guess the network was already talking to major sponsors like Procter & Gamble, who said that it sounds great, we'll buy the show outright. But the nanny has to be Italian, not Jewish.
Fran fought against the demand, believing that the character would be better if it was something that spoke more to her personally.
I could be very rich in specificity, and I didn't have to think about being somebody that wasn't very close to me.
In her book, Drescher also described how, thinking this show was her last best shot at a major success, she wanted to do it on her terms. Executive producer Robert Sternin also described how, by making the family she worked for British, she would be more appealing as an American. Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter, he said, "The idea was to make her the American girl who happens to be Jewish rather than the Jewish girl working for the Wasps." A reaction to a Jewish leading lady wasn't entirely positive, though. Writing for the Los Angeles Times, Judith Pace called The Nanny the most offensive example of a stereotypical Jewish American princess. Whining, demanding, loud, obnoxious, and never as sexy as Gentile women. This prompted a response the next week from Fran Drescher, also in the LA Times, where she wrote, "I created Fran Fine based very closely upon my mother, myself, and all the wonderful and rich characters I grew up around in Flushing, Queens. I am sorry and sad if the way we really are, yes, plastic covers and all, offends Pace, mainly because all her article accomplished was to reveal her own insecurities as a Jewish woman living in a WASP culture." Behind the scenes, the writers were tasked specifically to keep the show authentic. In an interview, Peter Mark Jacobson said, "The show has a unique, specific voice. Many writers think they can do it, but they usually can't. They'll write in a bunch of Yiddish words, but rarely do we use them. Maybe it's because I've lived with Fran so long that I know what jokes will come out of her mouth and be appealing to the public. She knows it too." Although it's certainly true that Jewish stereotypes can be seen in Fran, it would be a bit reductive to only focus on those. And in some ways, Fran Drescher's own comments about her character's good qualities are selling the show short. Fran's Jewish identity can be noticed throughout the series, and not just as a pool of stereotypes that are pulled on anytime a quick joke is needed. In addition to her frequent use of Yiddish, she makes casual references to holidays, foods, and other parts of Jewish culture. In the episode The Cantor Show, Fran dates her Temple's cantor, Gary, played by Philip Kasnoff, only to see him leave her so he can chase a career in show business. In this story, Gary could have been anyone from anywhere, but by making him a cantor, it creates a logical reason as to how Fran would hear him singing in an environment not frequented by talent scouts, making him someone she discovers. If she had been Christian, this could have been done with her hearing him in a church choir. The story reflects a simple reality of the character, that their religious identity is part of their normal daily life. In an article for Teen Vogue, Yulia Kabinski wrote about how impactful representation like this was for her, highlighting the Cantor Show episode in particular, writing, "Here was the main character of a popular sitcom, at Temple, listening to a type of prayer I've rarely seen on screen, and she wasn't there to face her religiosity in any way, question it, or find fault with it, or examine it. She wasn't there to interact with it at all. She was at Temple because Jews sometimes go to Temple. the way Christians can be shown having Easter brunch without discussing the symbolism behind the resurrection of Christ. It was mere background for the comedic plot, a quite ordinary occurrence in this universe. The Fiennes going to temple felt akin to them going to Loman's, and that made it feel, dare I say, revelatory. I hadn't realized how hungry I was for this kind of representation, and how mostly absent it was, nearly 30 years on. Kabinski further describes how the series is aggressively unself-conscious in its Jewishness, and how Fran is meant to be a sympathetic character rather than one that's mocked. One analog she brings up is the character of Janice on Friends, who has more than a passing resemblance to Fran Fine.
Something deep in your soul calls out to me like a foghorn. Janice, Janice.
Unlike Fran, though, Janice was not initially meant to be likable. Fran does have traits that might annoy some people that could be called stereotypes, but her character transcends them to become endearing. Fran's comfort in herself and authenticity is just as true about her being Jewish as it is about her being a woman, and it's a type of representation that resonates powerfully. One slightly odd part of the series is that when holidays would roll around, such as during the winter, it was Christmas that got the spotlight, probably because Christmas episodes are something of a sitcom staple. The most striking holiday episode, though, was the Oi to the World animated special. In this one, we see Fran Fine's adventures enter the world of animation when she and Brighton go to the North Pole.
This hairspray really does hold.
We see Niles as a snowman, C.C. as an evil princess, and Maxwell as Kris Kringle.
Gee, if I knew he looked like this, I might have converted.
I'm Fran Fine, the nanny.
The episode includes a big musical number and is probably most memorable for how big a departure it was from the usual The Nanny fare. It was a bit strange that, although plenty of Jewish traditions are seen on the show, including traditional Jewish weddings and a bris, we don't see any Jewish holidays until Season 4 with the Passed Over story and Season 6's The Hanukkah story. The Fine family was not the only example of representation on the series. Behind the scenes, The Nanny included a large number of gay and female writers, and there were a number of female directors for the episodes as well. Although the series does include jokes at the expense of both groups at times, the fact that women and gay people played a creative role may explain why those respective audiences were also quite warm to the show. When it comes to gay representation on the series, though, it wasn't quite so kind early on. In the first few seasons, very few gay characters appeared, and the few that did weren't much more than stereotypes.
Maxwell Sheffield? I was in one of your revivals! 76 times!
Although Season 3's Oy vey, you're gay did offer a slightly more interesting character, Sydney, played by Catherine Oxenberg. Fran suspects Sydney is into Maxwell, possibly ruining Fran's chances with him.
You're gay? Oh, thank God!
While a gay character making a move on a straight person is something of a tired cliche, it is something of a step up from the more two-dimensional stereotypes we saw in the first two seasons. As the show went along, it also made a deliberate attempt to be less overwhelmingly white. In an interview with Vogue, Fran Drescher said, "There was a point where I felt like the show was too white, and I wanted to infuse people of color because it wasn't happening in the 90s. When you think about Friends, Mad About You, and Everybody Loves Raymond, they were all very white. Those were shows of their time, but we were set in New York, in the theater world, and I wanted to bring other elements to it." Perhaps the most striking example of that is in the episode Fairweather Fran, where Fran's grandmother Yetta introduces her fiancé, Sammy. Yes, that's Ray Charles as Yetta's fiancé. Not only do they get married, but Sammy would be a recurring character for the rest of the series. And Charles even performed My Yiddish Mommy at the end of his first appearance.
My Yiddish mama.
In addition to being absolutely adorable, this is quite possibly the only time we've ever seen an interracial couple between two older folks who are Jewish and Black on television. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I would love to be corrected if anyone has another example. Although this kind of representation is, in some ways, mild compared to what we would see in 2023, it was a welcome change from other 90s shows that seemed to exist in a version of New York City populated almost exclusively by white people. Even with all that lovely representation, I do have to mention a few poorly aged examples. The series does include a few trans jokes that would absolutely not fly today, and one of the most poorly aged things in the series is from the episode Not Without My Nanny. In it, Grace is invited by a friend to the fictional country of Khuristan, and Fran accompanies her. While the Arabian Nights theme is less than enlightened, it's not nearly as bad as the introduction of the Sultan, who bears a strong resemblance to Maxwell Sheffield.
You know, you look exactly like you do on the back of the chorus stand shekel.
Yes, that's Charles Shaughnessy in brownface. While it wouldn't be entirely accurate to say it's the same as blackface, it's still pretty bad. And it's a real shame that I'm going to have to mention this episode later on in this video because of an important plot point. There is this weird tradition of British actors in brownface, so Shaughnessy is in good company with the likes of Alec Guinness. But there's not much else to say about this, then it sucks.
Plus, I added a little seasoning to give it some flavor.
With what?
Tortellini.
To know Silvia on The Nanny is to know a few fundamental facts about her. She's Fran's mother, she's incredibly nosy, and she loves to eat. That last part in particular is where much of the comedy of her character comes from, and it's one of the most jarring things to see in the show in the present day. Renee Taylor's excellent performance of Silvia made the character increasingly prominent as the seasons went on, as the Sheffield kids had less of a role in the series, as well as Yetta and Val became stronger presences on the show. An example of Silvia's rise in prominence is in the episode A Fine Family Feud, where an episode about Maggie's 16th birthday party becomes a story about Silvia's feud with her sister-in-law, Frida. Frida is portrayed by Lainey Kazan.
They threw you out of Hadassah because you donated cakes with half the frosting licked off.
I felt lightheaded in the car.
With Silvia's increased role comes more jokes about her love of food. Silvia is based on Fran Drescher's mother, and apparently a recurring theme in the Drescher family is teasing Silvia about her love of food. And it's a genuine love of food rather than just trying to label her as some kind of unthinking eating machine. Even if Silvia's love of food may be a little more complicated in real life, on the show it tends to be reduced to a series of fat jokes. It would be ridiculous to single out this show in the 90s for making fat jokes, as they were a staple in sitcoms and other comedy shows, and would be for some time. That said, it's impossible to watch the show in the present day without noticing how these jokes start to hit differently, or perhaps more accurately, a modern audience is likely more aware of how these jokes always hit differently for certain people. And being more aware of that makes it harder to laugh at something when you know it's hurting another person. I think it's really important to also acknowledge that Silvia, and by extension Renee Taylor, doesn't seem to be particularly overweight, especially for a woman her age. In later seasons, Silvia goes on a diet and there are comments about how much she's slimmed down, but she didn't seem that big in the first place. At this point, the fat jokes mercifully slowed down on the show, though I imagine there weren't that many left to be made. Fran Drescher has openly discussed her own problematic history with food, describing her childhood as being filled with overeating and then going in the complete opposite direction when she became a teenager, replacing food with cigarettes. She describes her mother as part of that process, and there may be deeper issues at play here than a general disgust towards fat people. And in the series, there is some awareness expressed, at least in acknowledging that there's a problem with connecting food to one's well-being.
My God, I'm having palpitations. Quick, get me my
Even so, it's hard to imagine that there aren't better ways to make these jokes instead of pointing out that Silvia is, once again, eating a lot of food and supposedly very overweight. This is an example of how the show very much adhered to sitcom norms, and unfortunately, it was incredibly normal for sitcoms to constantly make fat people the target of many jokes.
Oh, look, he's like a little chestnut. You should call him Chester.
Few stars shine as brightly and steal a scene so snugly as Chester Drescher, Fran Drescher's adorable Pomeranian. Before appearing in The Nanny, Chester had a breakout role in the movie Cadillac Man. Although he wasn't originally booked for the movie, his charming presence backstage, having been brought along by Fran Drescher, who appeared in the movie, won Chester a brief cameo in the film. Chester was undoubtedly an easy casting choice in the 4th episode of the first season, The Schlepp. And let's be real, if you have a dog this cute, there's a good chance you're going to want to write him into your TV show. He played the gift dog from Maxwell to C.C.
An engagement dog?
I beg your pardon?
What an engaging dog!
Chester doesn't have much chemistry with C.C., but he does seem to like Fran.
You don't mind. He's my dog. I'll name him.
Fran Drescher explains how they managed to get the best out of Chester.
Peter and I wrote little jokes to build around how we knew that he would react.
Chester would appear on 14 episodes of the series, including one memorable episode, Fransome, when he's kidnapped. Chester was always a lovely addition to any episode and put on a wonderful performance, even at his advanced age, as he was 16 when The Nanny went off the air. A few years later, sadly, Chester passed away as he was approaching his 19th birthday, though he did pass on in the company of Fran Drescher. In her second book, Cancer Schmancer, Fran wrote, "Ode to Chester," and while I'm not going to read the entire poem, I did want to highlight the final few lines, which read, "After 19 years, it still came too soon. North Star, orange sky, crescent moon. The night could not have been clearer, and I thought to myself, it's the end of an era. The angels cashed in on their loan."
They're making Lost in Space into a movie. Oh, I loved that as a child. Oop, I'm dating myself.
Dating yourself? That's pathetic. Even you can do better than you.
Niles and C.C. have a very combative relationship throughout the series.
Oh, it'll be so wonderful to see Noel again. We used to have so much fun. Every summer he'd take me to the horse show.
Did you ever win?
Although Niles was well integrated into The Nanny, C.C. had a rougher time fitting into the show. She was there at the beginning pining over Maxwell, but it was C.C.'s interactions with Niles that helped bring the character into a more prominent place.
We weren't quite sure what to do with her.
We wanted to figure out a way to make her a very important ingredient to the show.
So we had that go back and forth and back and forth.
They were such a brilliant couple, those two. It was incredible.
The bickering between Niles and C.C. is a real treat throughout the series. Although Niles typically got the upper hand early on, over time C.C. started giving back as good as she got it.
Maxwell, your coffee's ready.
Although it was always overshadowed by their disgust with one another, there was also a small undercurrent of sexual tension between them.
Servant.
Trollop.
Bellboy.
Brunette.
We would even see brief signs of friendship between the two.
You know, you're actually almost charming when you're not being a mean, miserable old man.
Funny. I was going to say the same about you.
These brief dalliances with friendship and attraction would often dissolve by the next episode, in part because the series needed them to stay angry so that they could keep the joke machine running and generating all those zingers. By the end of the show's fourth season, though, in Fran's Gotta Have It, C.C. believes Niles has died after he suffers a heart attack, and she reveals her true feelings.
I know everyone thought Niles and I hated each other, but that's the only way I can have a relationship. When you really get to know me, I'm not a well woman.
The Niles and C.C. dynamic reveals a persistent class tension that this series is built on. Although the Sheffields warm to Fran, Niles and C.C.'s constant animosity reveal how difficult it is for those class divides to be conquered, even when there's a simmering sexual tension underneath them. The two of them are almost like children, teasing each other on the playground because they don't have the right framework to understand their hormones. Both C.C. and Niles have romantic interests throughout the series, so it's not like they don't know how this whole dating and romance thing works, but to be genuinely attracted to one another is unthinkable to them. You might have expected the two of them to get together after Niles' heart attack, but this show was very reluctant to let two people get together, and we wouldn't see Niles admit his feelings for C.C. until season 6's The Yummy Mummy.
You have feelings for Miss Babcock, don't you? Well, why don't you just come out and tell her?
Well, I mean, isn't it obvious? I mean, what do I have to do? Hit the woman over the head? Actually, I've done that.
From here, things escalate quickly as Niles proposes to C.C., only to be rejected because he's poor.
You surprised me tonight. You finally pulled off something bigger than your shorts.
Oh, yeah? Well, you walk like a... Marry me.
Well, it's always been a dream of mine to give up my Park Avenue penthouse and move into his room.
Niles doesn't quite take the hint, making 4 more proposals, but eventually he breaks.
Going to be 10, 20 years from now. You're going to be saying Merry Christmas to your friends in rehab and wondering what might have been.
This leads to them hooking up. We would get closure in the story in the series finale when the two of them get together, more traditionally. In an interview years later, Daniel Davis reflected on Niles and C.C. getting together.
I just thought
This is so flippin' weird. I don't know what to make of it.
Davis has a real point here. While Niles and C.C. certainly have this sexual tension between them, and it does bubble up throughout the series, it's hard to imagine it as anything more than that. And the way C.C. goes to Niles after he tears her to pieces reveals a strange masochistic streak in her, which would explain her pining over the completely uninterested Maxwell Sheffield for years. If the two of them didn't get a divorce immediately, I imagine they would have a marriage so strange that what they do in public would be some kind of horror show. Never mind what happens behind closed doors. But their marriage here is adhering to another sitcom trope. Niles and C.C. lusting after one another isn't acceptable. People can't just want to have sex with one another. They have to get married and live happily ever after. And this serves as another example of how The Nanny would consistently adhere to its traditional sitcom roots. A modern show might have had them become bang buddies, since they obviously can't stand one another, as a product of the class divisions ingrained into them. It would be a commentary on how sometimes people's attractions are hampered by social abstractions that we place onto one another. Although even if they did the work to undo that conditioning, there's no reason to believe they would be a good couple. Wanting to hook up with someone does not make them an ideal partner for life. And Davis is very astute when he reflects on whether or not they'd make it as a couple.
I think they got divorced in the limousine on the way to L.A.
The Nanny isn't so cynical a show, though, so we're left to imagine what would become of C.C. and Niles in the future.
I was working in a bridal shop in Flushing, Queens, till my boyfriend kicked me out in one of those crushing scenes.
The Nanny was very aware of itself as a TV show, with more winks and nods to the camera than I could possibly capture in this video.
Watch, next year she'll have her own sitcom.
Now, what makes that clip even cuter is that it was Fran Drescher's then husband and Nanny co-creator, Peter Mark Jacobson, delivering that line. This show adored making meta jokes. Here's a memorable one where Charles Shaughnessy is reminded of his old Days of Our Lives role.
It hasn't been the same since Shane left.
He auditioned for me once, with that phony British accent.
And we're reminded of Anne Morgan Gilbert's time on The Dick Van Dyke Show.
I used to love that Millie Helper, the neighbor. She was so funny. I don't know why they never spun her off.
I heard she was very hard to work with.
There was a joke highlighting Lauren Lane's real-life pregnancy.
I was watching this rerun of Seinfeld, and Elaine must have been, 12 months pregnant. And they didn't even acknowledge it. They just kept hiding her behind these huge props.
In the real world, Fran Drescher and Ray Romano of Everybody Loves Raymond fame were in the same high school class, so their characters met on an episode of The Nanny at a high school reunion.
You know, Raymond, in high school, I had such a crush on you.
Well, who didn't? Everybody loved Raymond.
The opening theme of The Nanny was referenced so many times on the show, you could almost recreate the whole thing just using spoken lines from the series.
I was working in a bridal shop in Flushing, Queens, until my boyfriend kicked me out in one of those crushing...
Stop it! Where was I to go? What was I to do? I was out on my fanny, pardon my French. I've got style, I've got flair. How could I become the nanny?
Fran Drescher even shilled her book on the show.
Well, have you read this one? It's a riot. Plus, it just came out on audio cassettes.
Fran Drescher's parents made several cameos, including a recreation of their time appearing on The Rosie O'Donnell Show, where they reviewed restaurants.
Did you go and eat at the early bird dinners?
Yes! Are you kidding? South Florida is great for this.
The second strangest meta joke was the episode The Bobby Fleckman Story, where Fran Drescher reprises her role as Bobby Fleckman from This Is Spinal Tap.
Oh, they're so sweet, they're so fresh. Come on, they're the hottest band in town. Don't you love Wu-Tang Clan? With chicken or pork?
It's a strange moment to be sure, but even stranger was seeing Fran Fine run into Fran Drescher in the season 6 episode, The Baby Shower.
Excuse me, Miss Fran Drescher, but I am your biggest fan. Oh, thank you.
Tell me something. What's the butler like? Is he as funny in person? I think he steals the whole show.
We did that very same story this season. Really? I didn't see that. When was it on? Now. And don't forget to watch the series finale next week. Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world.
So in this world, The Nanny is a show on television, but there's also a real Fran Fine living with the Sheffields. It's probably best not to think about it.
I can do it in 2 minutes. Well, darling, it has been 5 years.
By far, the longest running plotline in The Nanny is the will they, won't they dynamic between Fran and Maxwell. Originally, any romance between the characters was entirely subtext, such as seeing Fran pretend to be married to Niles, who's pretending to be Maxwell in the episode The Butler, the Husband, the Wife, and Her Mother. We'd get our first external sign of a burgeoning romance a few episodes later in Personal Business.
Look at us. Couple of nut eaters.
Several other moments like this were peppered throughout the first 2 seasons of the series, revealing how there might be something more than friendship between these two. In Stop the Wedding, I Want to Get Off, we see how their potential relationship reflects one of the themes of the series.
Imagine being blind to the fact that you love someone just because they work for you.
I know, it's unbelievable.
Yes, well, good night, Miss Fine.
Good night, Mr. Sheffield.
There would also be a number of scenes where Fran and Maxwell would sometimes accidentally become physically intimate. For example, in the episode Close Shave, the two of them get very close when Fran is mistaken for a nurse and has to prep Maxwell for his appendectomy. While Niles and C.C. represent a clash between the classes, Fran and Maxwell mostly get along from the very beginning, even if their differences make it a little difficult for them to see what's right in front of them. While it should be mentioned that Fran does occasionally annoy Maxwell, they always reconcile, ensuring that their professional relationship and friendship is preserved, as well as the possibility for that to be something more. Maxwell and Fran never seem fully aware of how well they might fit together, or the other's feelings, and that barrier is created by their professional relationship.
I need a guy that cares about what I think.
It's fine, what do you think? What would I do without you?
All I'm saying is I need a guy who needs me.
One thing that becomes very apparent, watching Fran and Maxwell, is the chemistry between Fran Drescher and Charles Shaughnessy. The two of them work very well together on screen and carry the affection of the two characters have for one another convincingly. By the season 1 episode, Sunday in the Park with Fran and Maxwell were already kissing.
Oh, thank you, Miss Fine. Oh, thank you.
Of course, it wasn't exactly the kiss that comes with a confession of love, and they would share many more kisses before any grand declaration came along. In fact, there were a total of 7 kisses before Fran and Maxwell expressed their feelings openly and honestly. And even then, in the season 3 finale, A Pup in Paris, we needed one more kiss to get them past the finish line. Also the threat of imminent death.
I love you.
But did I say finish line? Because Maxwell takes back having said he loves Fran in the season 4 premiere, The Tart with Heart.
Yeah, you know, that I felt that way at that time in that place.
Oh my God, you're taking back the thing?
If all of that sounds like a frustrating tease, imagine how audiences at home must have felt watching this unfold every week over the course of 4 years.
What kind of a doormat are you to live with a guy all those years that keeps the fact that he loves you a secret? I mean, believe me, I know people that live like that. And by the 4th year, well, I'm sick of it.
One piece of intrigue was in the season 4 episode An Affair to Dismember, where Maxwell's brother Nigel, played by Harry Van Gorkum, makes an appearance, and Fran finds herself starting to fall for him.
You are nothing like Mr. Sheffield.
Darling, I am Mr. Sheffield.
Nigel proposes to Fran, and she weighs the likelihood of Maxwell ever making a real move. She instead decides to take a chance on the man offering her a future, but on her way to meet Nigel on his boat, a series of delays keep Fran from boarding it.
Lady, you meant to be on that ship?
I guess not.
When Fran goes back to the Sheffield house, she realizes what she has with Maxwell.
Very soon it'll be opening night. You'll be there wearing something smashing.
I'll stick a couple of Tums in your cummerbund, so when you get nervous.
It's fine. You all right? Have you been crying?
I went clubbing with Val and I hurt my ankle.
Don't you worry, Miss Fine. I've got you.
Boy, do you ever.
Up to this point, a lot of Fran's flirtations with Maxwell were centered around his good looks and wealth. I'm certain she thought he was a good guy, and she certainly cared about him, but this is the episode that really reveals the depth of her feelings as an attraction that is more than the superficial. As oblivious as he is to her, she senses he does care about her in a way he can't seem to explain to himself, in part because he's still trapped by the memory of his dead wife and his need for Fran to be first and foremost a caregiver for his children. In other words, her role as the nanny is what's keeping them from getting together. As Fran becomes increasingly certain of how she feels, Maxwell continues to dither. He takes back having taken back he said that he loves her, and the two share 2 more kisses. He even tells her that he loves her again.
I, Maxwell Sheffield, care deeply for Fran Fine, and told her I love you.
C.C. didn't take that one so well. Even with all of that, the confessions and the kisses don't quite get him to commit, with Fran becoming increasingly frustrated with Maxwell. In the season 4 finale, Fran's Gotta Have It, she decides it has to happen or not between them.
You know, I always thought that we were going to end up together, but if it ain't gonna happen now, it ain't gonna happen.
No, I didn't say it'll never happen.
Well, I think that my chances are only going to decrease as I slowly morph into Yetta.
Miss Fine, I am not giving in to my urges. The stakes are far too high. I'm a bloody gentleman after all.
I don't quite understand Maxwell here. Is it being a gentleman to say you love someone, constantly make out with them, and then stop yourself from sleeping with them at the very last second? A more suitable reason for them to not get together is that there's a very real problem in the power dynamic of dating your boss. That is complicated by Fran being more like a member of the family, though dating inside the family also seems like a bad idea. At least they're not related by blood, though. This is how the story distinguishes itself from the strictly class-based one of Niles and C.C. The divide exists for Fran and Maxwell, but their employment relationship adds a whole other layer to it. This is a very old trope of a powerful man falling for a woman who works for him. Though in this case, it's made more palatable with the person with less power doing most of the pursuing. You never get the sense that Fran is being preyed upon by Maxwell. If anything, you could say Fran is the one who's going after him. The feelings and attraction she has for him seem real, even if their working relationship would undercut the idea of them being genuine. When season 5 rolled around, the romantic tension was milked just a little bit longer. Although Fran and Maxwell did start dating, it wasn't quite as intense as 4 seasons of build-up would suggest. Things go up a notch halfway through the season, though, when we get the unthinkable in Call Me Fran. First, Niles gives the audience a voice.
I told her I loved her. I took it back. I'm afraid of commitment. I'm worried about the children. For God's sake, make a move! Do something! You cast off cats! Do you want to regret this for the rest of your life, too?
And then Maxwell does the unthinkable.
Well, are you saying you're quitting?
Yeah.
No, please don't go, Miss Fine. Miss Fine, come back. Fran, wait.
It's amazing how the use of a person's name can make so much of a difference. It's the dissolution of their professional relationship. Or rather, it's making it less important than their personal one. Maxwell's fear of intimacy may be best understood that the bound of propriety he was so afraid of crossing was a professional one. Going from using Miss Fine to Fran symbolizes his decision to cross that boundary. And once he's done that, the two of them can finally start a real relationship. If love can ever happen in this kind of employer-employee dynamic, it would need to be done in a way where the power transfers over as much as possible to the person with the least of it. So much so that Fran threatens to leave her job just to get the relationship off the ground. How likely this would be in the real world, though, I imagine the vast majority of employer-employee relationships aren't quite so generous and probably have a great deal of predatory behavior in them. Maxwell probably also would have gotten in trouble for all the times he kissed his nanny before she really fell for him. That first kiss, for example, was him just spontaneously kissing her out of nowhere. Not something you should ordinarily do with somebody who works for you. Things started moving very quickly between the two of them in season 5, and unfortunately we have to go back to the episode Not Without My Nanny. Luckily, we don't have to talk about the character of the Sultan, because what matters most is the conclusion of this episode, where we see Maxwell finally tell Fran how he feels about her without any reservations. Yes, he said he loved her before, but he's finally saying it here without their problematic work relationship being an abstraction that really lets him commit to her.
Fran, I love you.
And commit he certainly does, because in the space of 3 episodes, we went from seeing Maxwell use Fran's first name to saying that he loves her, to finally, in the 15th episode of the season, the engagement, he does just that. This episode doesn't jerk us around with any more indecision, though. Maxwell just goes for it, though his plans are interrupted by a mugger.
You got the time?
Yes, 8:15.
don't really want to know the time, do you?
When Fran finds him, the ring is gone and Maxwell has to improvise.
You know, it's all so sudden.
Well, will you?
What do you think?
Before the wedding, we get some closure regarding Fran and Nigel in the episode The Best Man. Nigel has moved on to a new wife, but when the truth comes out, Fran apologizes and Maxwell forgives her. After it's revealed he hooked up with Marla Maples around the time Fran nearly ran off with Nigel.
Goodness, how long ago was that now? Oh, 6, 7 years?
A year and a half.
Oh, really?
And that finally brings us to the wedding in the season 5 finale titled The Wedding. This two-parter gets a little weird when Maxwell is visited by the spirit of his dead wife giving her blessing for the new marriage. Fran also helpfully breaks the fourth wall to offer a counterpoint to a criticism of this lengthy romance.
It's really such a beautiful story. I mean, some say it's pathetic, but you know, I'm going with beautiful.
Maxwell's sister, having had her marriage with the limo driver crumble, warns Fran about the marriage.
Turns out Mummy was right. Classes can't mix.
When Maxwell tells Fran why he loves her, her cold feet disappear and the wedding moves on.
You blew into our lives 5 years ago like a whirlwind. Made us all feel alive again. For that alone, I'll love you forever.
A priest and a rabbi prepare for a nuptial and make it double with joint officiating of the wedding. And it all goes off without a hitch, although the honeymoon doesn't get off to the best start. We find out they're just fine next season, though. On the other hand, The Nanny as a series wouldn't be quite so safe. As this relationship settled into something meaningful and real, it reflects the way every one of these stories typically end on a sitcom. The boss and the worker fall in love and realize they're happier together as a couple than they are as two professionals. A more cynical reading here is that the only way to change your lot in life is to marry your boss. But another gentler one would be the revelation that professional divisions are not as important as the love that can bind us instead. It's a fairy tale that doesn't often exist in the real world, of course, but so often that's what sitcoms are. And once again, that reflects the conventional nature of this series. Regardless of the dynamic, if there's any romantic tension between a man and a woman on a sitcom, especially if they're the leads, they will almost always hopelessly fall in love, regardless of the boundaries in their way.
Just when I figured out the bidet is not a water fountain.
By this point in the series, the Fran and Maxwell romance was driving the show. Their wedding at the end of the 5th season was the highest rated episode of the series in 2 years. But with Fran and Maxwell happily married, it raised the question of whether or not the audience would stick around for its 6th season.
When a show is built around a unrequited love or love that can't happen, sexual tension, you have to keep it that way. As much as you want the people to get together, as soon as they do, people start tuning out.
And that wasn't the only obstacle the series faced. For its 4th season, The Nanny was moved from its usual time slot on Monday to Wednesday nights, which was a weaker night for the network, and the original night for The Nanny in its first season, where it had struggled. Although it initially had strong ratings, CBS failed to find other shows that could capitalize off its success, and the night struggled to find a consistent audience overall, which in the long run started to hurt The Nanny. Fran Drescher believes that Monday was being opened up for shows favored by the new CBS president, Les Moonves, such as Everybody Loves Raymond. When Moonves asked Drescher to record a promo encouraging her audience to watch the new Bill Cosby show in her old time slot, she did not react kindly.
I said, Les, I don't mind if you shove an umbrella up my ass, but when you open it, you've gone too far.
Speaking to Vogue in an interview, Fran Drescher said, I wasn't his type, you know? He couldn't really control me. Once the show was established, he just didn't feel like he needed to support a show that was part of a different administration. He wanted his shows to have the best time slot, his shows to get the big push, and his shows to be the big successes, so he just buried us on another night. While on Wednesday nights, the show started to struggle throughout its 5th season, and the network gave Drescher and Jacobson an ultimatum.
They called us and they said, look, if you get them married and it does well, we'll put you on for another year, but on that night. If you don't want to get them married, we'll cancel you. So we looked at each other and said, you know, well, we're having a wedding.
This would explain how Maxwell and Fran went from kinda dating at the beginning of the 5th season to getting married by the end of it. Because of how drawn out the romantic tension had been through the preceding 4 years, things certainly needed to escalate, but perhaps the wedding was sooner than it needed to be. At the very least, Drescher and Jacobson were hoping for at least a 7th season. By the show's 6th season, though, the ratings were getting significantly lower. It went from getting roughly just under 12 million viewers a night in season 5 to struggling to reach 10 in season 6. And as a frame of reference, on Monday nights, it reliably got more than 13 billion viewers a night. With the ratings slumping, the network decided to pull the plug on the show. In her second book, Fran Drescher describes how the network convinced her to say that she had decided to end the series, on the slim hope it might garner some interest, as opposed to announcing it was being cancelled. But sadly, the gambit didn't work, and the show's 6th season would be its last. And that wasn't the last bit of poor treatment that the nanny would face. Although the first 14 episodes of the 6th season aired as usual during the fall and winter, the next 6 would be pulled from the spring schedule, and it was replaced by Cosby. The Nanny Finale aired on May 12, 1999, while the 6 unaired episodes would be broadcast in the summer of that year to very low numbers. What made this particularly bad for the show was that The Nanny was building to its finale with several story arcs. While early seasons of The Nanny were self-contained, the later ones had plot lines that built from episode to episode, much like the ongoing romance between Fran and Maxwell. These season 6 episodes that aired during the summer included important developments in the Niles and C.C. relationship, the development of Fran's pregnancy, and Maggie's wedding. Missing all of that ahead of watching the finale must have been disorienting for the audience tuning in to see how The Nanny ended.
The flashy girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Heading into the show's finale, as I mentioned in the previous section, Fran was very much pregnant, something that happened earlier in season 6. At first, Fran and Maxwell planned to wait until having children, back when they discussed it in season 5.
I guess it's okay if we wait a while. I mean, after all, you don't make a baby necessarily on the first time out.
Fran would have a pregnancy scare in the beginning of the 6th season episode, I'm Pregnant.
Doc, are you thinking that I might be pregnant?
Maxwell isn't on the same page, though.
Oh, no. The last thing we need right now is a baby running around the house. Anyway, come on, tell me what's your good news.
Bloomingdale's is having a big shoe sale.
Oh, come here.
It's an unusually sad ending for an episode, and the next episode, Mom's the Word, is even sadder. Maxwell does get on board with having a child, but it seems like it's not to be when Fran finds out it was a false positive pregnancy.
Dr. Reynolds, thank God you're here. How's the baby?
Fran, I'm so sorry.
I need to clarify something the show did not do with that ending. In that clip, the gravity of everything really made it seem like this was a miscarriage rather than a false positive. But the next episode clarifies that Fran was never pregnant.
False positive. Turns out you were never pregnant.
What?
While I'm sure that's still upsetting, it does seem a bit careless to end the episode as if this were some kind of miscarriage story. Perhaps that was a call that was made after the fact to soften the blow of this episode and avoid the more difficult story, but it seems like they could have just established it a little more clearly here rather than ending on such a powerful note that would ultimately be undercut in the next episode. The whole experience does change the perspective of Fran and Maxwell, though, and they decide to try for a child. And Fran finds out she's pregnant in the episode, Oh Say Can You Ski?
Oh my God. I'm pregnant.
And not just pregnant, Fran is having twins. After that gap of 6 episodes that aired during the summer, Fran's pregnancy is very far along as we head into the 2-part finale titled The Finale. The episode takes place on the first anniversary of Fran and Maxwell's wedding, and it largely winds down many of the stories of the season. C.C. finally gives in to Niles and agrees to marry him.
Niles, I would love to marry you.
It's so exciting a moment that everyone nearly misses that Fran is going into labor and the twins are on their way. While Fran is at the hospital, we see Niles and C.C. get married, and we finally learn C.C.'s name.
Do you, Niles, take Chastity Claire to be your lawfully wedded wife? Chastity Claire!
Fran then gives birth. She names the 2 children Jonah Samuel and Eve Catherine after Fran's grandparents. Also, C.C. is pregnant. We then see Bright and Maggie, who have decided to head off to Paris together, leaving Fran, Maxwell, Grace, and the babies to move together to California so Maxwell can begin the next chapter in his career, producing a TV series. As Fran prepares to leave, there's an extended flashback montage, and then Fran Fine closes the door to the mansion one last time. Or second to last time, because she forgot Yetta in there and she needs to get her out. And then she does it for the last time. This finale is actually a bit short for a two-parter. Even with that montage, they still had 2 minutes left over for a curtain call, and the last we hear from the series is...
With much gratitude, thank you very, very much. God bless and think peace. Good night, everybody.
This ending follows sitcom standards to a T, right down to the door being closed one last time. Everyone is off to live the next chapter in their lives, carrying the memories of the time they were all a family together. Although Fran Fine was always a unique leading lady, her send-off emphasized how conventional The Nanny was as a sitcom. It was never intending to reinvent the wheel, merely create something that was the best version of what a sitcom was in the 90s. Its unique fashion sense is at odds with its very traditional behavior, the same way a sharply dressed nanny is somehow the perfect fit for the well-bred Sheffield kids. While it was perhaps cancelled too soon, it's also true that it could only go on for so long. At the very least, there was some desire to do a 7th season, but how much longer could we have seen Fran and Maxwell go around in circles? And audiences did not seem to react as strongly to the version of Fran and Maxwell that were married. The show at some point would have needed to reinvent itself. And it might have been a good thing that it never had to go through that, as many sitcoms don't often come out better after that kind of a shakeup. And had it just stayed the same, it might have started to feel a bit stale. The version of The Nanny we got was able to end its run without feeling like it overstayed its welcome. And so we have a show that delivered on its premise so well and so consistently that we still remember it 30 years later. The cast of The Nanny didn't vanish entirely from television screens, and in 2004, Lifetime hosted a reunion titled A Nosh to Remember. Rather than bring back the characters, though, we instead see the cast reunite in Fran Drescher's home for a large meal where they reminisce about the show and enjoy old clips. It's a fun extra that reveals how close the cast remained. Only Daniel Davis wasn't present because he was out of the country with an acting commitment. We'd see a few other semi-reunions over the years on other programs. Charles Shaughnessy appeared on several episodes of Fran Drescher's next sitcoms, Living with Fran and Happily Divorced. Renee Taylor and Anne Morgan Gilbert also appeared on Happily Divorced. In 2020, the cast also reunited for a live reading of the pilot during the COVID-19 pandemic to help raise people's spirits and bring some awareness to Fran Drescher's charity, Cancer Schmancer. The Nanny isn't ready to fade away either. Fran Drescher and Peter Mark Jacobson have been working on a musical version of the story that has been in development for a few years now. It's being directed by Mark Bruni. Originally, the music was to be by Adam Schlesinger, with Rachel Bloom writing the lyrics, but Schlesinger passed away in early 2020. Although production has slowed, recently Drescher has said the musical is still moving along, although she also added that she can't imagine it opening for at least another 2 years. Another project for The Nanny waiting to materialize is some kind of revival of the original series, possibly as a movie. The plans are still very early and undoubtedly were slowed down by the recent WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, although Fran Drescher did express a desire to honor The Nanny, with 2023 being the show's 30th anniversary, so something may materialize in that year or possibly the next one. Speaking to TV Insider about the series continuing, Drescher said, "She was hell-bent on getting married. Being married, as lovely an institution as it is for many people, I think you have to carve out your own independent path and have the ability to express yourself separately and apart from your husband and your children. I think that is what we would explore. Who is Fran today? What is she doing to satisfy her needs and creativity, her politics, fashion sense, love for her children and parents and husband? That would be explored in a new season. We'll see. We're going to talk to Sony and see what happens." The Nanny also found a lot of success outside of the United States. The original was broadcast in more than 90 countries. One particularly notable thing about the Italian translation of the original series is that, when it was dubbed into Italian, Fran Fine's Jewish heritage was completely erased and she was made to be Italian. Much like how, when the show was originally going to be aired, CBS requested that Fran be changed from Jewish to Italian to appease advertisers. Though I haven't watched the Italian version of the series, there are certain sections I can't imagine making too much sense, such as the very clearly Jewish holidays being celebrated, or Fran's trip to a kibbutz in Israel. The series has also seen a number of remakes set in different countries. There are 11 different versions of The Nanny, and funnily enough, 5 of the adaptations are in Spanish, though only 3 of them are titled La Niñera. After The Nanny, Charles Shaughnessy has been very busy, appearing on Mad Men, reprising his role of Shane on Days of Our Lives, and numerous other roles on TV and film. He won the Emmy for Outstanding Performer in an Animated Program on the series Stanley. Most recently, he's had a recurring role on the soap opera General Hospital. Daniel Davis continued to appear on screen following The Nanny, including appearances on Frasier and Ugly Betty. Primarily his work has been on the stage though, appearing in numerous plays, including performing as King Lear and Prospero in productions of King Lear and The Tempest respectively. He also appeared alongside Lorne Lane in a one-off performance of Love Letters, and he most recently appeared in the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard, reprising the role of Professor Moriarty. Lorne Lane has only appeared in a few projects after The Nanny, including lending her voice to the movie Gen 13. She made the decision to leave acting on screen professionally so she can instead transition into a teaching career. She is currently teaching at Texas State University in San Marcos, and she has performed in several productions at the nearby Zachary Scott Theater in Austin. While The Nanny was coming to an end, Nicole Tom started voicing Supergirl on several animated DC projects. She has also appeared in the movies The Princess Diaries and Her Only Child. She's also made guest appearances on numerous television shows and recently appeared as herself in the celebrity edition of Worst Cooks in America. After The Nanny, Benjamin Salisbury would appear in Simone, Red Zone, and Numbers. In 2006, he left the world of acting and is currently working as the Director of Operations at Universal Studios Hollywood. Madeline Zima has appeared in numerous films and TV shows following The Nanny, notably being featured in the TV series Californication. She also made appearances on Twin Peaks: The Return. She's also said to appear alongside Megan Fox in the upcoming movie Subservience. Renee Taylor has appeared in several projects since The Nanny, including roles in The Do-Over, Ice Age 2, and How to Be a Latin Lover. She celebrated her 90th birthday in 2023 and will hopefully have many more years to come. She also reunited with Fran Drescher in a fun Instagram post promoting the streaming debut of The Nanny on HBO Max.
No commercials? Ma, you press pause to get your snack. Oh. I was worried.
Rachel Chagall appeared on Just Shoot Me, Strong Medicine, and What I Like About You following The Nanny. Since 2006, she has largely stopped acting and has retired to a private life. While working on The Nanny, she was pregnant and delivered twins, which was part of the inspiration to give Fran twins as well. And Morgan Gilbert took some time off from acting after The Nanny, though she returned to the screen to appear in episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Law & Order Special Victims Unit, and Grey's Anatomy. Sadly, she passed away on June 14, 2016 at the age of 87 from pancreatic cancer. Fran Drescher would appear in several projects following The Nanny, such as the sitcoms Living with Fran, Happily Divorced, and Indebted. She also hosted the Fran Drescher Talk Show, that's TAWK. She performed on Broadway in a revival of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella as the stepmother Madam, and she's also done voice work on the Hotel Transylvania movies. In her personal life, Drescher revealed that she had suffered through 2 years and 8 doctors' worth of misdiagnoses before finding out she had uterine cancer. She was treated and is happily cancer-free, and she set up a charity called Cancer Schmancer to promote healthy living and vigilance toward the early signs of cancer, particularly for women whose concerns are sometimes ignored or downplayed by doctors. Having been elected as president of the SAG-AFTRA union, Drescher made headlines for a powerful speech she gave defending the rights of workers ahead of the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike.
How they plead poverty, that they're losing money left and right when giving hundreds of millions of dollars to their CEOs. It is disgusting. Shame on them. We are labor and we stand tall and we demand respect and to be honored for our contribution. You share the wealth because you cannot exist without us.
Although remarks were prepared for Drescher ahead of time, apparently she ignored her speech and instead spoke in the moment, off the top of her head. The speech also prompted people to share a clip from the Nanny episode titled The Strike, where Fran refuses to cross a picket line.
I can't go in there. My mother had 3 rules. Never make contact with a public toilet. Never, ever, ever cross a picket line. What was the 3rd one? Oh, yeah. Never wear musk oil to the zoo.
The SAG-AFTRA strike eventually came to an end, and hopefully the deal reached is equitable and fair and respects the talents of the many actors who bring your favorite movies and TV shows to life. And I'd like to express full solidarity with all unions standing up for the rights of workers everywhere. The Nanny has left a long legacy and is still enjoyed today, though it is still very much a reflection of the time it was made. Writing for Vulture, Bethy Squires described the success of the series due in large part to the character of Fran Fine, a type we don't see in leading roles very often. Squires wrote, Fran is equally as likely to be the butt of the joke as the one doing the joking. She is ridiculous, but relatable, and because the show's supporting cast was mostly women, it was able to highlight all the ways to be a lady while still underlying how fake femininity really is. She also describes quite aptly how aware of television Fran Fine was, constantly making references to sitcoms of the past. And I highlighted the many meta references the show would make throughout its run. This is a show that was very much aware of itself as a sitcom and its place in sitcom history, and because of that, it knew how to fit that mold perfectly in the era it was created. Sitcoms are also typically thought of as comfort television, and The Nanny has certainly been described that way as well. Behind the scenes, it was even true for Fran Drescher. She wrote in her second book about how it was a refuge for her. There I was fearing the worst about my health situation, while Fran Fine was healthy as a horse. I was conflicted about having a baby, while she was pregnant with twins. She'd found the man of her dreams, while my marriage was coming apart at the seams. As topsy-turvy as it all was, I frankly relished the time I got to play Miss Fine, because her life was so much better than mine. She was funnier, happier, and less complicated. She became my refuge. It sounds sad because it was sad. While Drescher's life may have been in a sad state, and happily has very much recovered from that state, it does speak to the power of sitcoms, and The Nanny specifically. It clearly meant a lot to Fran Drescher behind the scenes, and it certainly meant a lot to the people watching at home. Fran Fine represents an exaggerated vision of femininity. She both critiques the stereotypes while reinforcing the reality that can sometimes be found in them. She's not the typical sitcom star, but stars in a typical sitcom. She's the sort of character who people say, you shouldn't be here, when she's been there all along. Even in the 90s, sitcoms starring women had been around and found success for a while, but The Nanny still reflected the limitations of what a woman can do in that format, while celebrating all that was accomplished within it, critiquing the space while appreciating it. The Nanny is a show filled with contradictions, and that may be the secret to its success, a conventional idea that had a powerful impact. And when it comes to a show that executes on a format, very few did it as well as The Nanny. Longtime viewers of my channel, those specifically who enjoy my sitcom retrospectives, probably never expected to see this one. For a long time, I resisted working on The Nanny, not because I thought the show was bad or unworthy of criticism, but because of behind-the-scenes complications when it comes to dealing with certain distributors, let's say. I really have to give full credit to Fran Drescher, who, standing up to the Hollywood studios, made me think, you know what? If she's willing to fight, so can I. So much thanks to Fran Drescher for creating a great show and reminding us that sometimes we have to fight to express ourselves. If you thought this form of expression was something worthy of a bit of support, do consider joining my Patreon, like the many fine names you see scrolling up your screen now. Or you can also become a YouTube member. You get your name in the credits, early access to my videos, and other fun bonuses as I come up with them. If you would like to support this channel in a non-monetary fashion, you can always like, comment, subscribe, or hit the bell for notifications. Thank you all so much for watching.